Frankel for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. So maybe a couple of years ago, I sat in on one of these civil works review boards, which I guess we don't have anymore, but it took like a full day. And there were like maybe, I don't know, there were a lot of people around the table. But one of the things that I realized in listening to all the discussion and the different steps was that a lot of the requirements of the steps were based on laws that Congress had passed and requirements. So I wanted to just ask you, I think one of you testified about impediments to the process, the authorization process. I'd like you to tell me specifically what you see as impediments that have been created by the Congress, because that's where we could probably help out.
The chief may speak to this further, ma'am, but as far as I'm concerned, there are some. It's not our place or our position to determine which ones are impediments and which ones are still good legislation. But when you go through the entire process that the Corps has to do on a continuing basis, either on a project or future policy, there is legislation as well as our own internal policies that affect that. I'd be more than happy to talk to you about any of the individual legislation you may be talking about, or in general. I'll be happy to talk to you personally.
Well, no, I'm not myself. I'm not talking. I'm asking you because we may have the ability to change. You know, you keep talking about changing your processes, and I'm asking you, how does Congress impede your process?
Well, ma'am, I think you'd have to, you would have to point to specific legislative pieces in order to point that out to you.
Maybe the general can answer that question.
Well, ma'am, I mentioned this in my testimony, and I think I'm not sure that any one of those actions was ever specifically to try to slow down, but the cumulative effect of all of those processes has had a significant impact. And I talked about the 20 things that we've worked. They're right here on the spreadsheet. We have worked very closely with the administration to say, here's some ways that we could continue to be able to make sure we're protecting the environment, we're taking care of water resources, but it allows us to streamline. Things like acquisition, long-term contracts. How do we go down through the budgeting process? How can we work through OMB and continue to be able to streamline the processes in OMB? So that's what we want to offer back to you, is to say, help us find ways of helping ourselves.
So, will that require legislative changes?
I think some are, but the vast majority of them are policies. They're things that we can change by changing rules or regulations, but not necessarily law.
Okay. Well, that's why I'm just asking you if you thought we needed to change any of the laws. Okay, I have another. My timer's not working, so I'm just okay. So I have another question for you. And this is Mr. Schuster's favorite issue. Yes, the sand. It's the sand. We're running out of sand we've run out of sand in Broward and Dade County. It's gone. So, and sand is very important, obviously for tourism, but also to protect the shoreline and so forth. So for them to get, I'm going to give you an example. A recent Miami-Dade trucking contract was $8.6 million for 140,000 cubic yards of sand. Now, they could buy sand, foreign sand, at about 50% less. Now, for the Congress, $8.6 million is considered chump change, but not for local governments. And I just gave you one example. So I tried to change the law. We did, in this committee, we changed the law that would make it easier to buy the sand from the Bahamas. Incidentally, the sand goes south. I think the sand from Miami went to the Bahamas anyway, so we're just trying to get it back. But what happened is along the way, I'm sure, I'm just guessing, but I know Mr. Schuster could probably verify this, the truckers got involved in the process because the language changed and turned what had been language in our bill into a study. Now, I don't think the study's been done. Has the study been done? I mean, it's a stupid study. I don't know why we have to do the study. I'm just curious, though, did we do this stupid study?
Ma'am, I'm not tracking a study on sand in those two counties. The challenge we have, and this is a national issue, is we continue to spend an awful lot of money on beach renourishment. And we're having that same challenge in other places. So the question is, are there innovative ways that we can try to retain that sand so that if nothing else, we can dredge it from just where it's moving back on? Most of the stuff we do on the East Coast is dredging that sand back on the beach.
Okay, no, but that's a different issue. I appreciate that issue, but that's not the issue. The issue is there's language that says that says if materials are not available from domestic sources for environmental or economic reasons, these local governments can't buy sand, for example, from the Bahamas. And so they're forced to buy sand from the middle of the state in Florida and costs them twice as much, all right? So that's the issue. That's a separate issue until you invent the way to keep the sand on the beaches. They need the sand.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. General, if you could please provide answer to the committee in writing, that would be great. Thank you. I turn to the full committee chairman, Mr. Schuster, for 5 minutes.